Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Oddly Specific Pop. Hey, AJ, they try to keep us away, but they can't do it. So
Yeah,
we're back.
pretty much. We're like, you know what? I know that you hate us and you don't want us to do this, but guess what? We're going to do it. And they
Yeah,
said, no. And then we said, yes. And then they said, huh? And then we were like, who are we even talking to? And then that is what I call an improvisation. End scene. There we go.
Backstreet's back. All right.
All right. All right. We are very excited to be back in kind of a new format of sorts, I guess. You get to see this section of my face. You get to see all of Lou's face, so that's wonderful.
My
Um,
head.
yes, and yeah, we're back. We're riding side saddle next to each other, one horse, two guys,
Hmm.
and you
Well
know,
said.
yeah. Thank you. That's one of the things I've taken communication courses since we've been away. Totally paying off, I think, even more
That's
so
good
than
to
our
know.
comedy courses from when we were still doing this thing.
Those were dirt cheap, AJ, and we had coupons. So we didn't
That's
lose
true.
all that money.
We got a Groupon. It was a comedy class for two. It's supposed to be a romantic comedy class, but we just decided it's okay. We're gonna go with it. We're gonna roll with it, and it
Exactly.
worked. And it did help our relationship as well.
It did. It did.
So what's going on, Lou? What do we have on deck today?
Well, we wanted to hop on here and kind of just talk about something I was nagging you about talking about last year. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, we got to talk about this because Toy Story is like my one thing. So we're going to be talking Toy Story 4.
Yeah, yeah. Very excited. Very excited. Um, that was the twist. I know some people were thinking that maybe we were going to talk about Rise of the Skywalker. We are not, because I still have not seen it. And I'm going to try and drag it out and see how long I can go without seeing it, because there are actually quite a few people that are kind of begging me to see it, just because apparently it'll melt my brain. So I'm just going to try and resist seeing it for as long as possible.
Oh my gosh. I've seen that movie once and I can't wait to have you see it for the first time. And I hope you do live tweet it after all, AJ.
Yeah, I did say that that was going to be something that I do. So I guess maybe if it shows up on Disney Plus, that's gonna be the thing that's gonna like break it for me. I don't know. We'll see. I'm still 50-50 on if I'm gonna see Onward, and that came on today. I guess a little bit of news. I mean, there's nothing going on right now, right? So I mean, no real
Mm-mm.
need to do news, but just in case you missed it, because there's nothing going on right now. Disney Plus is putting Onward on its service
Yeah.
starting today. We're recording on Friday, April 3rd. So yeah, you can go watch that now. I'm 50-50 on whether or not I'm going to do it. You and I have talked off air. I have particular feelings about a particular Chris involved in this project. So
Evans?
yes, that one. He's perfect. Knives
The
Out. He's
superior
perfect.
Chris.
The superior Chris. Although Chris Pine is actually pretty good too. What was the thing that I just saw him in that I was like really surprised by how much I enjoyed watching him? I can't think of it right now, but Chris Pine is fun, and he seems to pick fun projects. So underrated, Chris Pine.
There you go.
So yeah, but we're here for Toy Story 4.
We are here.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm sure I've said it on the show before, but Toy Story, out of like all the Pixar movies, I think, or a franchise in itself, is one of my favorites because that's like was like my thing growing up when I was a kid. So it's like the one thing I kind of grew up on, like as I was getting older. So Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2 when I was 9, 10 years old, and then Toy Story 3 when I was got released when I was 20, I think. 20.
Mm-hmm.
Probably 20. So I've been watching these movies as I've growing up. So Toy Story 3 for me was like the epitome of like how I was nervous and how good this movie could be. Toy Story 3. And I was not disappointed by that movie when it came out. So when they announced this one, I was super nervous because I thought, oh no, Pixar's doing the Disney. They're trying to cash onto this beloved franchise and kind of mess with it. So I was super nervous going in, but I was cautiously optimistic on it. So,
Mm-hmm.
in honestly, I didn't know it was been that long since the last one. So the last one was released in 2010, Toy Story
Mm-hmm.
3, and then this one was released in 2019. So it was 9 years, and in between Toy Story 2 and 3, it was about 10 years. Somehow
Mm-hmm.
this feels shorter for me.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I was actually the I don't know if opposite is the right way, but I didn't come to the Toy Story films until relatively recently. In fact, I didn't start watching them until I want to say a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Basically, shortly after my daughter was born, um, and we were able to have a little bit of time, I started trying to go through some of the Disney films, thinking to myself, it'd be nice to sort of have a collection to watch with her when she's ready, and then also maybe to pick some good ones, and just have an idea of what she might want to watch. And so I don't think I watched Toy Story 3 until a year and a half ago. I'm pretty sure I live tweeted that. Um, and yeah, it was really, really interesting. I enjoyed them, but I think that it's really different when you're watching, especially the first two, uh, as a person in their mid 30s. Like the hits are a little bit different. It still works, but I'm watching it more from the perspective of a parent than I would be as like the perspective of a child. And the thing about Toy Story 3 that I felt was really resonant was that I'm still close enough to understand like that concept or that through line of aging with Andy, and then also I'm near enough to the idea of growing out of certain things. Like you and I, we met doing ministry work and youth ministry in particular, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I can't do youth ministry anymore. Like it's just not the space that I inhabit. I'm too old for that, and I think that there's a certain process that's involved in that, and maybe a certain bit of grief. And I think that Toy Story 3 really nailed that sort of melancholy really well. And so I was able to really sit inside of Toy Story 3 and I don't know if luxuriate is the right word, but really sort of soak in a lot of what it was giving me emotionally. I think that I was nervous like you about Toy Story 4, but maybe a little bit more apathetic because I didn't have that same kind of tie to the entire series that you do emotionally, especially that history that you have with it. And also because I I generally am not into um like these really long drawn out series. I think that that's not entirely the case. I love Back to the Future 3, although that's only in trilogy. Um, I love the Rocky movies, but kind of like you, I grew up on the Rocky movies, and it's like if when they come out with a Creed 3, if we get a Creed 3, I'm gonna be first in line for that. I just love the films. So but like I guess I've been really shifting in sort of the way that I see film and what I wanted to see, and I kind of wanted a new story. So yeah, I was a little bit more lukewarm on the idea of Toy Story 4. Um, but yeah, should we talk about the film? You want to sort of like run through a synopsis, man, or where do you want to go?
Yeah, so the way Toy Story 4 picks up after Toy Story 3, for those of you that, kind of follow the storyline of Woody and friends. Toy Story 3 arguably had the best ending for the series. So you could hope for, Andy moves on, he grows up, and he gives his toys down to Bonnie, who's their new kid. So this story kind of picks up right, I think a couple months after, Andy gives Bonnie all his toys, and it's kind of how the toys are transitioning from one kid to the next, and then kind of Woody's arc. I think this movie really focuses on Woody's like final arc. I would say, and I think that's kind of like the heart of the movie. And but I was really pleasantly surprised on where the story went from Toy Story 3 to Toy Story 4, because when I was going into it, I thought it was going to be like an episodic kind of movie, like the adventures of Woody and friends again. But as the story progresses, you can tell that it's about something else entirely, and there is like kind of like a story that they want to progress on. So I mean, I thoroughly enjoy the movie, and yeah, I was shocked that I liked it as much as I did. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, I really want to hear AJ's thoughts on this movie in particular. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the simplified version of the movie, and kind of like my initial thoughts, AJ. So what do you think?
Well, it's really interesting. So you and I are both creators. We create more than just this podcast. I create messes. No, I'm just kidding. So I have a real deep sort of um, love for the idea of creating art, any kind of art to sort of consume. And so I've been trying very, very hard, because there's that artist side of me, that I think is sort of really important. But it also, when I'm thinking about other art, so this in particular, Toy Story 4, I sometimes tend to put on my consumer hat, where I'm like, I'm a fan of what had just come out. I was very, very satisfied with Toy Story 3. And then I can also get very um, maybe cynical about the business. And, this isn't to say that um, Pixar and Disney weren't also seeing, hey, we could still make more money out of the series. It's entirely true, and also, if we're going to be honest, probably entirely likely that was one of the key things to deciding to make this film, right? Like, we can't deny that. But I was really trying to push back internally about, like, well, do we really need to tell another story? It ended so perfectly. It really felt like they put a bow on the entire series with Toy Story 3. And so really the big question is kind of an existential question for artists, which is, does this story need to be told? And as an artist, it's like, well, if you have a story there, you tell it, right? Like that's kind of like, that's the easiest answer that you can give. And I suppose with the rest of it is that we're supposed to sit, watch, observe, and then ask ourselves, was it worth telling? In that regard, I think it was. I think that it generally got through the narrative and the sort of um neat character development of certain characters, Woody in particular. And I think what's really been cool, and I know that this observation had been made elsewhere, but it's neat to sort of see the way this film in particular narrowed the focus almost entirely on Woody, when in the past it had been kind of like a Woody and Buzz, kind of scenario, right? Like they were
Hmm.
co-stars, co-headliners, and it was very clear Woody was the headliner of this. um, and so I think that it was really neat, and maybe this film ties an even better bow on the entire thing, because now you got the final story for Woody, which is, can you find life after this? Is this all you're made for? What is your purpose, right? Like there's some pretty big existential sort of philosophical questions that are being run through in this film. I don't know that the film is always up to answer them or even to tangle with them, but they do throw
Hmm.
those up there for you to sort of like chew on if you want. And so yeah, I think in that regard it's entertaining, it's fun in a lot of places. um I really enjoyed Keanu Reeves turn as Duke Kaboom, which was
Yeah.
really fun. um and maybe you and I will get an opportunity to talk about this on some other episode or whatever, but I've been watching Hayao Miyazaki's films and for the first time. And so if for folks who may not be familiar with Miyazaki, who's an extraordinarily legendary animation director, award-winning director as well. He has been doing his work is almost exclusively hand drawn, and it's exquisite. But watching hand drawn animation and then kind of bouncing back to Disney and Pixar, which is almost exclusively CGI, so almost the opposite, right? It becomes very different. And the renderings in some of these shots were exquisite, and it's weird because it's like I don't know that I would ever rate one style over another. I think that in art it's all about sort of like various mediums, but one of the things I really appreciated was that there was this use of the space, as in most Pixar movies, in a way to really like up the artistry level. Like I'm thinking in particular the setting shots inside of the antique store where you had sunlight pouring in from various angles and
Hmm.
casting dust into the air, and it was just ugh, such a wonderful detail. I just thought to myself like, this is really beautiful, and I feel the same way when I'll look at like certain panels in Spirited Away or in Kiki's Delivery Service. I'll think to myself like, my God, that took so much work just to do that, you know.
Hmm.
um so it's like in that way I feel like it delivers enough to justify its presence, which is really funny because it's a film that introduces a character that is really confused about its own existence, for almost the entire film. um and I don't know if it was intentional, I don't know if that was meant to be meta, but yeah, like a lot of people were looking like myself, wondering, did Toy Story 4 need to exist? Well, I guess maybe as a potential answer, did Forky need to exist? And I guess he kind of did. He was a central figure. He was the reason for all the hijinks in the film. And I think much like Forky, Toy Story justified Toy Story 4 justified its existence. So that's my takeaway. Like I don't know that I would go beyond saying like, yeah, that was a fun ride. But I think that when it comes to clearing that rather important hurdle, especially for a franchise as storied as Toy Story, it did it. So
Hmm.
yeah, that was my read.
No, 100%. I mean, and it's funny that you mentioned like the way that this animation is kind of done. As someone who's kind of like a nerd of all things, like behind the scenes of everything, animation is something that I'm not familiar with because all I do is camera work. Excuse me, camera work. And I noticed throughout this movie there was a lot of the way that certain shots were set up. It takes like a skillful like cinematographer and a good direction even for animated movies, and it really shows that animated movies, like, they're just as complex as regular traditional looking movies. And I think Pixar is like the king of that, because there was certain aspects of this movie where, like, there were certain shots, like if you're kind of familiar with lenses and cameras, you can kind of tell the way things are shot, and the fact that they animated certain things to look like they were shot with a certain look of lenses, it really spoke volumes to me. There's a specific shot like that, it's like a nothing shot, and I think I saw a YouTube video once on this subject matter, but it's a lens called the split focus lens, or split diopter lens, so you can focus on two different things at once, and so it's a very specific looking thing. And so for most people, they're like, oh, it's a neat trick, but it's like something that you didn't have to animate. So like you can tell that they're putting a lot of effort into this stuff, or like the way that certain things reflect into the camera, like the digital camera. um it's really interesting because those are like certain artifacts that you can only see in vintage lenses, and that's something that they animated it, it's something that they didn't have to do. And so it really, I think it speaks volumes to the way that these people animate films. Like they're like next level, they do things that they don't have to do, but they kind of do it because of the craft to make these movies as good as they are. And this movie could have been just pretty, and I could have thought, oh, it's nice, and so it gets a passing grade from me because it looks pretty. But I think the script's really good as well. I mean, I don't think it's as tight as like I think Toy Story 3 maybe, but I like the questions that it asks, like you mentioned. So I like the script in that sense because it really, it's kind of like a footnote in the story of the Woody, because the first three movies, they kind of center around the ensemble, and then it's Woody has always been the central character in all these movies, but I think this really shows that final arc because when you see Toy Story 1, Woody's kind of not the nicest toy around, and throughout the
Right.
course of these movies you see that growth in the character. So I really really enjoyed that. And you know maybe it was me that, or I did see this argument, or this not argument, but this parallel in the story where like it's not so much about, not just about Woody finding his purpose in life again. It's kind of like showing kind of like when parents have their kids grow up. It has similarities to that, and what happens to people when they have an empty nest, and so they have to find a new purpose because they had their kids growing up, all their life, and then suddenly they're gone and doing their own thing. So I kind of saw those little things in the movie, and I don't know if it's like for sure that that's what the filmmakers were intending, but it's something that I kind of interpreted, and so it really like tug on my heartstrings there when he's like trying to find his purpose because was he had Andy grow up, so he was kind of lost.
Yeah, I think that the most interesting sort of like thematic things for me were about sort of Woody's search for meaning, which again, I it's really interesting to me because it's like it seemed like he already had that, right? And maybe the point is that life doesn't work like a perfect story, right? Like life doesn't turn out like that. And so you don't often get endings, or I guess I should say life doesn't end at the conclusion of Toy Story 3. You know, that's usually not how it goes. And the idea that Woody might have some problems fitting in or sorting things out, or then, going through the various growth and changes of another child. Yeah, like, and then also kind of wondering, is it worth it for yourself? I think that those are all wonderful and normal things to contend with. um the question, I think, for me, or the hiccup for me, is that I'm not sure that thematically that was done in a way that was sort of like more than just adequate, like it got the job done, you know, like it got
Mhm.
us through, and it allowed us to see some really cool set pieces, and it really told a lot of really fun jokes. I mean, my God, this may have been the funniest Toy Story I've seen.
Mhm.
And so I thought that in that regard, if I was going to give the writing high marks for something, it was going to be less on the thematic elements and more on the fact that it was just superbly comedic. Like that may have been one of the funniest children's movies I've ever seen, just joke for joke. Like I was really, really stunned. And maybe it helps that you had Key and Peele be a part
Mhm.
of it, which was a really, really fun surprise to get to. But their whole like running gag was it was some of the most satisfying comedy I've seen in a while. Just it went on, and it's a rule of threes, and that third one was that's textbook comedy writing. You know what I mean? And so it's like
Mhm.
that's where my mind was. Like I was just like, oh yeah, the thematic stuff is okay. And like I said, they throw the questions up. I don't know if they ever come down with answers that are more than just sort of like what you might expect from a Disney or a Pixar film. But the jokes were so perfect, like so perfect. And I feel like you
Oh
could
yeah.
live in that comedy more like any number of times. Like those jokes I think will still work. And so that's what I thought was maybe like the most winning part in all of this. And as I mentioned, the animation, although I will say one of the things that watching Miyazaki has really shown me is sort of like the way in which that those concepts of camera angles, panels, shots, things that you don't expect in a typical, like the angles that you don't expect in a typical animation film. I feel like those things were established um, in a lot of his earlier work, which informs sort of some of the things that you see now. And so, like one of the things that really stood out, like my daughter's been watching Frozen 2, and I saw similar shots like this in Toy Story 4. Um, you will have like these panning or tracking shots in animation, and that's weird. Like I can't remember when we started to see a tracking shot in
Mhm.
animation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Except I've seen them in Miyazaki's stuff, you know? And so it's like it's really interesting sort of like how art informs each other, and then also like how eh, these sort of like master creators end up like pushing the envelope on what you expect, you know? Because it's like the photorealism stuff is really interesting. The various ways that they play with space and light are really interesting. But the thing that was really bowling me over was just the way they made the camera move in a manner that felt like a live action.
Mhm.
And those are things that you don't see in most animation. And so I think that again, it's you come to expect these things from a studio as renowned as Pixar, but it's very clear that at the very least they weren't just banking on people coming through and then feeding us like a direct to video version of Toy Story. They really put in the work
Mhm.
to do it. And so in that way, I felt like, okay, yeah, it got the job done, and it pushed it across the line. So yeah, I don't know, man. I thought that it was a fun ride. And when Marilei's older, I think she's really gonna enjoy that one, I think.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, and the funny thing is like the way that animation traditional was made. Um, it was hand drawn, right? But it was grounded into this medium that is animation, and then eventually they started making these movies more grounded. And there's like, I forget what it's called, but there's a reason why certain movies resonate more than others, especially in animation. Like, for instance, I don't know if you've ever seen The Polar Express.
Mhm.
So movies like The Polar Express and even some traditional movies, they make cameras do things that you can't do. So there's like a long tracking shot going through like some pipes, and it's going through like places that a camera can't fit, and it kind of breaks that realism, even though it's animated. And what brings some realism back to these movies, these animated movies, is grounding the camera. There's a human behind the camera actually filming this stuff, so it feels like it's not just something that's abstract that someone made, in a computer, but it's something that someone took the time to track a shot or to set up a shot and have it look a certain way. So yeah, I commend this medium of actually pushing the envelope a little bit, like kind of restricting themselves. Because with animation, you can do whatever you want. You can have the camera do whatever it is that you want, but grounding these movies really brings a certain thing that you can't replicate, and that's like that human element of it.
Right. I think that a pretty good example in terms of like recent film and even within the same conglomerate would be to sort of look at the climactic scene of Frozen 2. And maybe it's because I see it so often, but the this scene just really bugs me because it's clear that they went for photorealism for the water, but
Hmm.
they used like whatever effects they use for Elsa and the water horse, or the water spirit. And so as Elsa's riding through the wave, they clash for me. It looks like clip art on top of like real water.
Hmm.
And I don't know if there's a way, or I don't know even if they intended for it, but those are one of those things that like really sticks out for me when
Hmm.
I watch a film. And you don't have a moment like that in Toy Story 4. And that's not to say that, because I actually really enjoyed the story in Frozen 2, even with caveats. And I adore Frozen 2, but I think that that's one of those things where like I was watching this and I was like, I don't think that there's a panel or a frame that is that made me go like, huh, why did they do that? It felt like
Hmm.
it all sort of like fits. And again, you know, these moments might have been intentional and maybe I don't understand it, and I'll have to like look at whatever commentary might be available on Frozen 2 on Disney Plus or whatever if they have it, or look online. But you don't see moments like that in other sort of like masterworks usually either. Like my daughter has been loving Kiki's Delivery Service, and this is a film that came out in 1988, and the animation is still exquisite, like perfect. Some of the angles that they choose to animate, the way that he animates strands of hair all going in different directions, so that the technical ability to shoot those frames took a lot of manpower. Because even though everything else looks the same, hair is going all sorts of different directions. Like it, that's the thing about like when you see a master work, you're just thinking to yourself like, whew, number one, how much work did it take? Like it's obvious, and then number two, you're just kind of awestruck at like the commitment to those details.
Hmm.
Because why? And yet it's because it is that, like when you're creating something for a visual medium, or if you're writing something, you're always trying to ground it into a space that the people can anchor themselves in. The audience needs to be able to find an anchor. And if you can't, then sometimes you end up dropping the veil. Because really in sort of any kind of work of fiction, what you're asking to do is you're inviting people into a world, and you're asking them to buy into the lies that you've built, right? and to be forgiving of any gaps that may exist, because the end goal, which is the climax, is so worth it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, Frozen 2 delivers on all of those things, but under greater scrutiny or under like multiple viewings, you'll get to that point where the horse is riding down towards the fjord and you're just like, huh. And it's weird because that's not the first time the horse shows up in that first scene when she's going up to the island, and it looks fine there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know. I can't explain it. I wish we could like clip that scene without running into copyright laws. Like, hey, this is the scene I'm talking about. But yeah, it's really it's that thing about like Toy Story 4. Like I remember like at the end of it, I was just like, yeah, yeah, that was a good way to spend an hour and a half. That was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of fun. So
Yeah, I mean, and even Pixar had those hiccups. I don't know if you ever saw The Good Dinosaur. I
mm,
think that's the only Pixar movie I have never finished. I watched like the first like 15, 20 minutes, but I just couldn't get past that super high realism setting with really cartoony looking dinosaurs. And
mm,
I've heard gripes about the story and everything, and I just couldn't get past that aspect of it. And the story was slow enough for me to not get into it, so I never finished it because
mm,
of a couple of aspects. So I know that Pixar, and even though that they're owned by Disney, I know Disney Animation and Pixar are totally different entities. And I mean, seeing the animation from both of those kind of really solidifies that this is Pixar and this is what Disney produces in their in-house animation studio. And yeah, I enjoyed Frozen 2 quite a bit too, but I did notice like some things that I kind of prefer in the way that it's shot for in Toy Story 4. Just
mm.
direction alone and cinematography alone, not including the story or the characters or anything like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's really smart of all these what's it called? All these studios to hire actual directors, people who care about the direction of these movies go, and it's not just like just the title. They're actually doing what traditional animation and traditional movies actually do. And so yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see where animation goes from now, because Toy Story 4 to me was like the epitome of what Pixar can do in terms of animation. Like I can't imagine it getting more realistic in how jarring it could be if they go over that threshold that's like too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, again, it's that thing for me where maybe what I'm trying to get myself personally to, and it's not going to be for everyone. I'm not saying it has to be that way for everyone, but my ultimate sort of like place that I want to be when it comes to these kinds of projects, like I guess maybe legacy projects,
Hmm.
especially for big studios, is to just say, okay, if you want to do this, that's fine, but you got to justify your existence, right?
Hmm.
And so maybe I'll choose to tune in, maybe I won't, but if I do, then that's what I'm going to grade it on. That's what I'm really going to look at. And I did, you and I we've had long conversations sort of off air about Mulan. Mulan was her its release has been delayed because of the thing that we said wasn't happening outside. Um, and so the for me, there's a question, like all of Disney's live action reboots, do they need to exist? And
Hmm.
again, it's that thing where it's like maybe on a case by case basis. Cinderella justified its existence. um Beauty and the Beast felt like a curse. um and Aladdin was fine. Aladdin was fine. I haven't seen The Lion King. I've heard a lot about sort of the uncanny valley of the eyes in the
Hmm.
animals. But I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know. And then then the question of, did it justify its existence? I hear one of the critiques is that it's basically shot for shot, you know. of the Lion King. And so it's like, well, then that doesn't justify its existence, does it? You know, like,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that movie a couple times, and both times I've seen it, I thought this is fine, but I would rather be watching the animated version of this because I like the Lion King, the new remake, just based on like a technical aspect of it. Like, wow, they can make this, and that's it. Like, that's where it starts and ends. And even though I enjoy one, I've seen it a couple times. I've enjoyed it for what it is, but more of a technical achievement and less of an actual movie that needs to exist. You know, the same way that if they would have shot a documentary or narrated a documentary and then animated the animals, that would have been the exact same thing for me. Like, wow, you can do this now? That's crazy. But like none of the way that these animals behave, like it's great in the wild, but the voice doesn't match the, I mean, I'm going to go on the Lion King tangent here, but there's a scene in the new one where, you know, if you've seen the Lion King, spoiler alert, when Mufasa dies,
oh
you
my
know,
gosh,
it's a very
spoiler
emotional
alert.
scene in the
Gee
animated movie.
whiz.
Sorry, AJ.
I was thinking they'd retcon that.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No, man.
So
Well
there's, you
then.
know, it's a very emotional scene from Simba and Mufasa. You know, Simba's like crying because his dad just died, you know, calling him dad, dad. And then you see the same scene in live action remake with CGI, and his face is like blank, but the voice acting is more like the animated movie,
Mm,
where there's a lot of emotion behind the voice. And then you see like a lion just staring.
yeah.
Like it looks so weird because you can tell that the emotion needs to come through, but it can't because it's too realistic.
Right.
You know?
Right. It's then that's sort of like that's the point, right? Like that's that thing where it's like if this was all just a flex of the tech, well then why? Right?
Yeah,
Like that
exactly.
that's sort of like it. And so I think that that's the difference, you know, between that and a project like Toy Story 4 because they flexed the tech, they flexed um you know all of the potential like ways in which that you might push um I'm gonna sound like Aaron from The Office, where all the boundaries of color are pushed. You know, like where you really pushing the envelope on sort of like what you might expect in a animation film in terms of again space, cinematography, and the way that shots are presented to you. Um, and they 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 do all of those things, but then they bring sort of the stuff that's really vital to a memorable film or to just a good film, which is that you have the audience has to anchor in like two places, maybe three, which is they have to emotionally respond to the story, they have to find the visuals compelling, and those two things have to combine together to continue like technically to continue to allow them to sort of keep the veil up on everything,
Hmm.
right? Like they have to all those things have to work in concert to continue to allow the movie going audience to buy into the magic of, you know, this world that you've constructed. um and you know, I haven't seen The Lion King, but I have seen exactly the same kinds of critiques that you were sort of indicating, and that's, you know, that's what I'm seeing. And so it's really interesting to me that, you know, the whole um the whole fear for me or the whole anxiety for me around this film was, is this going to be able to justify having been made at all,
Right.
you know? um which, as it turns out, I think that that's what a lot of folks were really trying to um sort of sort out for themselves, right? Like, I don't I think that that might be one of the crucial things that everyone sort of goes through as they are um, working through like any major piece of media, I suppose.
Right.
I think that that's just going to be a typical thing. Um, so yeah, I guess I'm proud and happy to be able to declare for myself that it justified having
Hmm.
been made. Um, and even if the story doesn't feel like it's pushing boundaries and it's not really sort of like taking you anywhere different, it was a tight enough script, a lot of moments that were fun and warm, as you'd expect in sort of this universe. And I guess the final linchpin for me was again just, oh my gosh, the jokes were so good. The jokes were so good.
Hmm. And
um
I think honestly, the humor in the Toy Story movies, it doesn't get recognized enough because even the earlier Toy Story movies are pretty good in the humor department, and even like a lot of jokes that are not very Disney-esque. I forget if it's Toy Story 1 or Toy Story 2. There's a joke in there with I forget who says it, but I remember it's they go like, the word I'm thinking of I cannot say because they are preschool kindergarten toys around.
oh yeah, 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 that was a
And
good one.
these are like, jokes that I wouldn't expect. They're pretty tame, but I wouldn't expect from like a Disney studio or a Disney owned property to do, especially when traditional kids movies. And that's something I
Yeah.
really enjoy for these movies. They're like family movies. It's not just a movie made for kids, which some of these animated movies, they kind of suffer from that. They're like, we're making this specifically for 5-year-olds, and that's great, but it's not like the ones I enjoy the most because I enjoy, you know, certain level of storytelling that you don't get with every studio. But it's not an exclusive Pixar thing; it's not an exclusive Disney thing. But some studios tend to sometimes not think that kids are smarter than they are because they are. Kids are super smart, so they don't make them. They I don't want to say they dumb it down, but they don't make the story as tight or the themes as elevated as they could because they think, well, this is a children's movie.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be that line in the sand. This is for kids and this is for adults. I think especially in movies, the medium is so great to tell all kinds of stories that you shouldn't have to make movies that you kind of have to dumb down for a demographic. Like, I don't think that should be a thing that should exist. You can cater to certain demographics, but I don't think they should be exclusives.
Mm. Yeah, I think that maybe sort of in the realm of children's work, what it is it's about sort of expecting your audience to sort of get you. I guess that's the way it works for all art. But one of the things I think that um, is maybe a unifier for a lot of the most memorable works that are for children, is that they expect the kids to understand sort of implicitly all the things that are being served to them. We think about the kids' works that got me through school, Dr. Seuss, Shel Silverstein. Um, oh my gosh, who did James and the Giant Peach? Roald Dahl. Like these are authors that sort of trusted their readers to get them to understand the material and understand the thematic things that they were bringing, and just went in the direction that
Hmm.
that they did. And I feel the same in a lot of sort of Disney and Pixar films. I think that again, like you find tours within these spaces and they deliver. So yeah, I'm hoping that you know uh, these these classics they resonate for a reason, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that that's going to be the thing that sort of keeps bringing people back. There's a reason I still really enjoy watching Mulan, you know. Like I could watch that film
Hmm.
just any day of the week. There's a reason I love The Prince of Egypt, which I think is a top 5 animated film and one of the top 10 films ever. Just ever. It is really, really good. Um, so yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you entirely on that, and I think that um, in the case of Toy Story 4, you got an example of a film doing precisely that, being able to deliver
Hmm.
and trusting its audience to walk with them, um, throughout all the potential zaniness and stuff. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. 100%. And I hope that I'm still gonna check out Onward, uh, in spite or despite that my least favorite Chris is. I mean, he's not even on the list, but a Chris who
Well,
shall remain nameless.
one gotta go. That Chris went.
Yeah, exactly. Even though he's in the film, and listen, even though look, we're talking about Chris Pratt. Honestly, I mean, if you don't know this stuff,
Yeah.
um, despite what I think of Chris Pratt as an actor and as a human, um, his voice is super distracting in these trailers. Like I see whenever I hear that character, I hear Chris Pratt. It's so distracting to me. But I hope that Onward story is so good that despite that Chris Pratt's in this movie, I will still enjoy it, and I have high hopes for it to at least be closer to Toy Story 4 than it will be to Good Dinosaur. And I have the same hopes for Soul, even though some things I've seen already make me nervous about that movie. Um, I still have high hopes. I want to judge these movies based on how good they are, and also some of the behind the scenes stuff. I mean, I like how movies are made in general, so
Yeah.
all these aspects of it should be there. So I'm excited for these next two movies because of how good this one was, but I'm still cautiously optimistic because we could get a Good Dinosaur again or a Cars 2 from the studio. You never know. Not terrible movies, but hey, not hitting home runs like they do with like Up or Inside Out or even Toy
Mm,
Story 4. I think Toy Story 4 is a great movie. I think it's up there. I don't think it's like a top tier
mm.
Pixar movie, but I think it's definitely on the upper end.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree.
There you
Well,
go.
I guess that kind of gets us to the end of our show. And this is where we would normally go to what is bringing you joy. And so,
Hmm.
in a time like this where nothing is happening at all,
Yes. No.
um, maybe it is hard to even wonder why we need joy because we're joyous all the time, but we're going to do it anyway. Lou, what is bringing you joy this week?
Well, something that is bringing me joy this week, and it's kind of been my like escape, I would say, for the last couple of weeks. And I don't know if you were one of these people, but I've been recommended this show for years and years and years and years now. It's This Is Us. I believe the last season was this year. I think the last episode was a couple weeks ago. I think. I started watching this show the last I believe 3 weeks ago, and I just can't. I think this is such a great show, and I know that I postponed watching it because I knew how much I was gonna get into it, and being a super emotional person as it is, and being on like my heightened senses, this show is wrecking me. I've only gone through the first season and like 3 episodes in or 4, but this show is, I mean, the writing in this is so good and the acting in this is so good. Like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, from top to bottom, everybody in the show is so good. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you haven't seen This Is Us yet, like definitely get into it because I think the series already wrapped up, so you don't have to wait till next week or the week after um, to see what happens, right, AJ?
No, it's not wrapped up.
Oh no, not yet.
They actually, yeah, they actually were renewed for up to 6 seasons because this is season 4.
Oh, I did not know that.
And they the most recent episode is episode 18, but that's not a season finale. They actually had
Oh,
like
okay.
3 more episodes. I don't know if it got interrupted it's hard to tell because like shooting for the show started in July, and you know, usually uh people tend to give like season wrap photos, and I haven't, you know, there's just been a lot going on,
Hmm.
and so I haven't really like looked into like if any of the cast members like put up season wrap information,
Right.
so I don't know if they've actually filmed the remaining episodes
Oh yeah.
um of the season, but they're usually in the 20 to like, I think one of their seasons was 24. So they're a pretty standard um,
Hmm.
weekly serial. One of the few that exists nowadays, I suppose. But yeah, it's a fantastic show, and I'm glad that you've gotten into it. But don't worry, even though it's not done, you still got quite a lot of TV left
Oh yeah.
to go through to get there. And for those who haven't started, you've got almost 100 episodes worth, and they're about an hour long, so 40 minutes because it's network TV. So this is it'll tide you over week
Hmm.
to week. So
A hundred
yeah.
percent. I mean, and I'm kind of not wanting to binge them as much because I mean, with the news every day, I kind of sometimes avoid This Is Us because the news is already making me so emotional. And I
Yeah.
watch this show, and it's either from happy crying or sad crying. I'm crying all the time. So that's
Yeah,
what brings me joy.
very
Crying.
nice. Very nice. I think that that's kind of a relatable emotion or action at
There
the
you go.
moment, all things considered. So yeah, what's bringing me joy? There are a couple of things that are bringing me joy. First, again, as I mentioned earlier, I've been going through the oeuvre of Hayao Miyazaki, and my goodness, I blown away every single film, um the themes, the level of animation, the gosh, the sophistication of the scene setting and of the shots. I find him to be such an incredibly gifted storyteller and filmmaker, um, and I'm really glad to be doing this. I'm really glad to be doing this with my wife. We've been going through these films together. She had already seen Kiki's Delivery Service because again that came out in 1988, and I think it was released with an English dub in 1996 or 7. Um, and so she'd seen that film when it had come out back then, but we watched it all together again as a family, and she was like, oh whoa, I didn't remember this and I didn't remember that. That was really fun. And so it's just been really fun going through his films. I haven't decided yet, but I'm pretty sure Howl's Moving Castle is what's coming up next, which is like an epic, so I'm really excited for that. And then the other thing that we're doing that's really fun is I'm reading the collected short stories of Ken Liu, and the collection that I'm reading is The Paper Menagerie. Um, if you've seen Bao, which was the Pixar short film that
Hmm.
was released, I think, was it ahead of Coco?
I
No,
believe it was Coke. No, no, Coco was that awful movie,
Frozen.
that
Yeah.
Frozen short.
Right, right. So I guess it was the film after Coco, and now I can't remember which one that was. Um, but Bao took some of its inspiration from the Paper Menagerie, and Bao's whimsical, um, even if there's like layers of darkness sort of in it. Um, the Paper Menagerie is one of the best short stories I've ever read. It is also critically recognized as one of the best short stories ever written. It is the title short story for this collection. And if you're a fan of speculative fiction, if you're a fan of fantasy, if you're a fan of um, if you're a fan of good writing, you'll find something in this collection for you. I am just stunned at Ken Liu's ability to weave a tale. Um, there's stuff in there that reminds me of Black Mirror, Twilight Zone, and then stuff that just feels like its own genre. So yeah, read Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie. I think you can still find that title film actually available out on the internet, because The Verge had it, I believe, because people knew that Bao was inspired by that, and so they linked
Hmm.
to it. So yeah, maybe if you're unsure if you want to buy a whole collection of short stories, I know it can be kind of weird to do that. Um, check out The Paper Menagerie. Just like Google it and read that short story. It is incredible, and then I promise you, you'll want to read the rest of it. So yeah, that's what's bringing me joy.
Nice. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Uh,
The
impromptu.
Baker's Dozen.
The Bakers doesn't have returned. How are you? Great, I assume.
I hope, and I hope that you're still thinking that this is a podcast about soda.
And we hope that you're not disappointed, or that you are disappointed. I don't know. I can't tell at this point.
I don't know. Everything's backwards. All right. Well, thank you all again. We'll catch you around. Thanks for tuning in. Peace out.
Bye.